Today on Ministry Monday, I am speaking to Father Paul Turner. Hi, Father Paul. How are you today?
Great, Amanda. Thanks so much for letting me visit with you again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time as always. I love all of our chats. I've been blessed to have a few now on Ministry Monday with you, and so I'm not being facetious when I say I very much look forward to our interview today. It's been a great pleasure to prepare.
Well, thank you. I do too. I still listen to Ministry Monday faithfully and appreciate your good work on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So today we are going to talk about primarily your book titled Sacred Times. And this book is published by Liturgical Press. And it is a guide to the general Roman calendar and the table of liturgical days. Before we started recording, I mentioned to you that we could easily do a multi-part interview on this this book. It is so chock full of knowledge and information. And so I want to ask you just a couple questions just to kind of set the stage on it, and then we'll dig in.
Sounds great.
Okay. So, Sacred Times. It is a book, like I said, on the liturgical calendar. What was your inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, I think it's covering some very foundational material, especially with regard to the celebration of Mass and the Liturgy of the Hours, but also with regard to popular piety, just how people interact with the liturgical year. It's a topic that I think a lot of people take for granted. Of course, we know when Advent falls and when Easter ends, but at the same time, a lot of the details on that escape people. There are some very practical questions that come up in every parish and with musicians as well regarding conflicting dates on the calendar. Like what happens when the Pope dies and they want to have a funeral on Saturday?
Right.
Can you have a Catholic funeral on Saturday following Easter Sunday? Well, you can, but there are some rules that govern just what you can do. You can't do you can do a wedding, but the readings are set for that. So there are some obscure rules that that do come up in a very practical way for everyone who's planning liturgy in a parish.
And I want to mention too, our questions today are just going to focus mostly on the Mass versus the Liturgy of the Hours. And the book covers the Liturgy of the Hours at length too. But in my preparation, listeners, for this interview, I sent about 15 questions to Father Paul based on this book, and it could have easily been double. So for that reason, we're just going to focus on the Mass today. But you make a good point. There are so many norms, there are so many guidelines that the church in its wisdom teaches us, but as lay people, maybe sometimes it's hard to keep up. So I think this is a great start. So I'm just going to ask you some questions right away to kind of set the stage too. My first was about the phrase "the proper of time." So what you mentioned the proper of time quite a bit in the book. What is the proper of time, and what is that versus the proper of saints?
Yeah, thanks, because those are two important categories for grasping the concept of the liturgical year. So people know this kind of inherently, but it's nice to have some titles to put on them. So when you talk about what we usually call the seasons of the year, Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, ordinary time, these fall into the bucket that the Missal calls the proper of time. When the priest on a Sunday at Easter time needs to find the collect for that day, he is using the section of the Missal called the proper of time. But on a saint's day, he will flip to another section of the Missal known as the proper of saints, because they come during the proper of time, but they aren't necessarily interrelated. Um, we are recording this interview on May the 2nd, which is the feast of Saint Athanasius. He is known for his helping us understand the incarnation of Christ. So you might think that it would be more appropriate to have his celebration in Christmas time, because that was what he helped us understand, the incarnation of Jesus. but it falls during Easter time virtually every year because this is the day he died. It has little to do with his saint's day. Maybe doesn't affect interact with the proper time, but it has to intersect in some way. And as I say, there are rules governing what we do on these different days.
I think that's a good place to actually continue with the conversation of the saints. So let's start with the idea of saint days. So, first off, how did the post Vatican II calendar, or I should say, how did the Vatican II Council and now the post Vatican II calendar rank saint days?
Yeah, they ranked them based on a variety of criteria, such as how popular the saints are worldwide, what contributions they made, how many years the memorial has been honored, or even where where some saints had been omitted in the previous calendar, maybe these should be added on. And then they tried to categorize them within the proper of saints in a way that we could understand the relative weight of these celebrations. So like Saint Joseph is going to come up on March 19 as a solemnity. He's just a rock star of the saint, and the same would be true of the Annunciation of the Lord, in which we also honor Mary and her yes. Those are days that are really critical. January 1, the Mary, the Mother of God, also a solemnity. But then there are some other days that are feast days. They are honored a little bit more. For example, the days of the apostles, Philip and James come together on the 3rd of May. And because they are apostles, they rank above someone like Athanasius, who is important, but ranks as a memorial and an obligatory memorial for the entire general calendar.
Can you tell the difference between an obligatory memorial versus an optional one?
Yeah, sure can. When the revisers were going after the decision on which saints go into the calendar, one way that they found an opening to include more saints was to accept some on the general calendar for everyone that could be observed or may not be observed, depending on the local the local attraction to it. So Saint Joseph has another day on May 1, if I'm remembering right, that is an optional memorial because it is associated more with Labor Day, May 1 in Europe, and we do our Labor Day on a different day, so he doesn't have quite the same impact on that day. But that's a day that different regions of the Catholic world may take up as something that they think would be appropriate to them. So you may run into some names on the calendar that look very obscure. Some saints you've never heard of before, and they may not have an impact in your region as much as some other saint would. And the Vatican realized that and wanted to give each parish the freedom to observe an optional memorial or to not observe it. If they observe it, it ranks exactly as an obligatory memorial. You follow the same rules for it, but you can opt in or out.
Okay, great. You mentioned in the book a little bit of a dialogue about the memorial of Mary, Mother of God. You mentioned this just a second ago. Can you give a little context about the decision to have the memorial of Mary, Mother of God on January 1st?
Yeah, so January 1st is the octave day of Christmas. We have two important octaves in the calendar, as you would expect. Christmas and Easter both rank so high in our understanding of Catholic faith and tradition that they take a long time to celebrate. And the octave day becomes a significant day. So in Easter or at Christmas, that octave day is January 1st. In the previous calendar, that was observing a couple of different events: the circumcision of Jesus, which Luke mentions took place on the eighth day, and also the naming of Jesus that also took place on that day. So those became ways of identifying the day. But the revisers of the calendar after the council knew of earlier traditions that made January 1 a day commemorating Mary. And in fact, it was one of the first days to come onto the calendar honoring Mary. And they thought it would be good to restore her name to that particular day. They thought that would have more meaning than the devotional name of the name devotions around the name of Jesus, or the historical moment of the circumcision of Jesus. They thought this would help people enter into the mystery of Christmas at a new level by honoring Mary as the mother of God. So that became the thinking behind it, and why that particular day is ranked as a solemnity for us to observe.
You also mentioned in the book, too, the commons of Mary. What are the commons of Mary?
Yeah, I've already mentioned two sections of the Missal, the proper of time and the proper of saints. There's another section of the Missal called Commons. And again, I think this is helpful even for musicians to know, because there's some helpful information there, both in the Missal and in the lectionary, in this section noted as the Commons. So on some days, you may find that the missal only gives the priest the collect for a particular saint, and doesn't give you other prayers that he may need for mass. But he can find options for those in this section called the commons. So those have commons of Mary, commons of pastors, commons of martyrs, and any number of others. And they provide the priest with some options. But then when you look at the lectionary, you've also got a wide variety of options for readings that could apply. So let's say you're asked to prepare a prayer service around some particular saint, and you're looking for a good scripture reading to go with it, or responsorial psalms that have been set to music that would be appropriate to sing on this day. Well, the lectionary gives you a section in volume 4 for the commons of these different categories that will open up a treasury of scripture passages that you would find very, very practical. So that the commons of Mary, to take that particular example, give us, again, a wealth of scripture passages, responsorial psalms, gospel acclamations that people may find useful. In the tradition of the church, there was a hope that Saturdays that were unimpeded by other important days, that the Saturday morning mass could be observed as a memorial of Mary, and that still can be done. If so, the commons give us a selection of prayers and readings that would be very appropriate for her. But as I say, on any day that you want to do a prayer service about Mary, you'd find a lot of help in those sections of those books.
That's great. So I know I'm jumping back and forth
Yeah.
among the lives of the saints, but so we talked about obligatory memorials, optional memorials. Let's talk about solemnities for a second. So you mentioned external solemnities in the book. Can you give a little bit of information about what that is?
Yeah, it's a very obscure term, and I felt like I had to deal with it because the word external solemnity does appear in the general instruction on the liturgy of the hours.
Hmm.
As you said, introducing our conversation today, we're focusing more on Mass than on liturgy of the hours. But if you can look through the entire missal in vain for the expression external solemnity, and it's just not there. But it does appear in liturgy of the hours. It's a carryover of a term from the years prior to the council, in which someone could observe a particular day at a given mass. So let's say there were two or three observances on the same day, a saint and then something regarding the time, or two different saints landing on the same day. Well, you could do an external solemnity on that day, doing one mass for this saint, one mass for that saint, one mass for for the time that of year that this took place in. Or the other usage for it is if you wanted to observe your parish community's patron saint on a different day than when it fell, then you could move it to a more convenient day for everybody. If people were free on a Saturday morning, then you could celebrate the external solemnity of that saint on that day. So the Liturgy of the Hours notes that in the past that permission was given only for Mass and not for the office, but now it is permitted for the office as well. So the most practical way this might come to somebody would be let's say that your parish is dedicated to Saint Joseph. Oh, well, let's pick a different saint outside Lent and Easter. Let's say Saint Justin. He's
Perfect.
June 1. He's more likely to be somebody who might come outside Easter time, and uh, but someone who is later in the year, you would have a permission to move his observance from the weekday to the Sunday. And in doing that in your parish, you would be moving the external solemnity to a different day. But as I say, it's a term not much in use. I included it in the book because it does show up in the Liturgy of the Hours. Uh, having said that, the other time when people might want to move an observance to a Sunday would be an ordinary time when you have uh, an ex, uh, an observance of the anniversary of your parish's dedication, the church's dedication. Some people like to move that to a Sunday in ordinary time, which is permitted, and then everything moves with it. The entire office, all the masses, everything goes with it, and that becomes the solemnity for that day for that particular parish.
So let's talk a little bit now outside of the saints, although still within the context of the saints, but let's talk a little bit more about holy days of obligation. So, how were holy days of obligation chosen?
Now, the list of potential holy days comes in the Code of Canon Law. So it's little out, even though it affects the liturgy and how we worship, it has this legal concern about when are people obliged to participate at Mass. So that whole decision was in law, and I'm not as familiar with that development about how those 10 possible days were selected, but they are in the Code of Canon Law, and then an Episcopal conference like ours may choose from those 10 options which ones we want to make holy days. There are certain days that we have to take, like Christmas is going to be a holy day every year. And then we have to observe certain days, and perhaps the two examples that most people may be familiar with would be Epiphany and Ascension.
Hmm.
We have to observe these, even though they have traditional days associated with them. Now, the Epiphany, a lot of people still like to call January 6th Epiphany Day, and that's popular piety coming back into play in the United States, because for us, we've moved it to a Sunday so that everybody celebrates Epiphany at Mass. If we kept it on January 6th, then it must become a holy day of obligation in the United States. And our bishops decided not to try to push that. It would be difficult to get people back together again so quickly after December 25, January 1, then January 6, and the Sundays in between. It just seemed like a lot to do. So our bishops moved it from the 6th to the Sunday. And then something similar has happened with Ascension Thursday, where again, Thursday is the tradition behind that because of St. Luke saying that the Ascension took place 40 days after the resurrection. But the Vatican wants every Catholic to assist at Mass on the Ascension. So if you do not accept Thursday as the holy day of obligation, then it must move to a Sunday. in our conference of bishops, our bishops could not all agree on whether to keep it or not, but they could agree on letting certain parts of the conference accept it. And that's why you'll find in some regions of the country, people still observe Ascension on a Thursday, and others have moved it to a Sunday. Everybody celebrates Ascension, but it will be a few days apart, depending on where it is within the United States that you live.
I'm actually in part of the region. I'm in a diocese that still has Ascension Thursday as a holy day of obligation. So
Yeah.
I find this particular day to be very fascinating in that regard.
Yeah, it is. I don't know of any other country that bifurcates like this, where some people do it on that day and some do not, but somehow the Vatican agreed to it. Our country is highly complex and we have different
Mhm.
different interests in different parts of the country. It would be in some ways to our advantage to get that unified again. But this is where we stand right now, and it seems to be working for
Right.
the parts of the country where you're at. And again, I'm not a canon lawyer, but if I were to visit your diocese on that Thursday, then that becomes a holy day of obligation for me. If you're in
Yes.
my diocese on that Thursday, you can come to mass if you want, but it's going to be Thursday of the sixth week of Easter time.
Hmm. That's an interesting nuance in our calendar that still remains to this day. Let's talk about another thing on our calendar, which is, of course, common practice at this point, I believe, for us Catholics in the U.S. at least, and that's Mass on Saturdays. So historically, how was Mass determined to be allowed on Saturday evenings as an anticipatory Mass for Sunday? How did that decision come about?
Yeah, that's something that's been in Catholic Church tradition for a while.
Hmm.
Again, that might fall more under canon law than liturgical law, so I may not have all the best information on its origins, but I can recall even in my early life that you did not have Saturday night or Saturday afternoon masses that counted for Sunday when I was a kid, but gradually that did become a possibility based on some ancient practices. You still see some vestiges of the ancient practice in what we call vigils, the Easter Vigil being the classic example of this, where it is a Saturday evening celebration. Christmas also has a vigil, Pentecost has a vigil. There are some big days on the calendar that have this observation the night before. So the law allows that to happen on any solemnity, any Sunday that would come up. So the Saturday afternoon possibility is there. And it is for late afternoon. Again, so a canon lawyer would have to tell you the rules over times and things, but
Right. Right.
but a mass in the morning would still observe the Saturday calendar, and only on Saturday afternoon or evening does it switch to the Sunday observance.
Hmm. Let's talk another observance. You talk in the book about Ash Wednesday, and so you talk about Ash Wednesday and the dialogue that exists or existed between Ash Wednesday as the start of Lent or the first Sunday of Lent as the start of Lent. So why was Ash Wednesday chosen as the day that it is?
Yeah, as I recall, Ash Wednesday began as a universal practice in the Catholic Church in the 10th century. And even though that may seem like a long time ago to you, in Catholic Church history, that's kind of recent. It's not like Christmas, where you've had this day on the calendar for a very long time. But Ash Wednesday developed regionally, and if I remember right, it was kind of late that it became universal. So it was in the 900s, that late 900s, that entered the practice, and it obviously caught on very well. Why was it chosen? It certainly had to do with the number 40 and how do you compute the 40 days of Lent. So it seemed to be a way of freeing people from Lenten fast on Sundays by giving them 40 weekdays beginning on the Wednesday before the first Sunday. This is a tradition in the Roman Rite, But in the Ambrosian rite of the church, centered in Milan, they don't have Ash Wednesday. Lent begins on the first Sunday of Lent and has a very different tradition. So when the revisers were taking on Lent, they actually discussed changing the beginning of Lent from Ash Wednesday to Sunday and counting the 40 days, in a different way. And they really thought that Pope Paul VI would go for it because he had been the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan. He was very familiar
Oh.
with that practice,
Mm-hmm.
but he said, "Well, as Pope, I'm the Bishop of Rome." And so he did not impose the Ambrosian calendar onto the Roman calendar, but said we should stay with the Roman calendar. But he was the one who kind of determined that Ash Wednesday was going to stay on the calendar. I don't think I realized till I was reviewing some of this material just how close we came to losing Ash Wednesday in the
Hmm.
Roman Catholic Church. But that would have meant we began on Sunday. And one of the problems that revisers encountered was how do you do a penitential exercise on a Sunday? And they couldn't resolve that. You couldn't do ashes on a Sunday. That was too penitential for a day that is always the Lord's Day. Remember,
Hmm.
the kind of the center value that the whole calendar is based on is the Paschal mystery, the death
Right.
and resurrection of Christ, and that gets honored every Sunday. So
Right.
they couldn't make it a day of penance that's just contrary to what Sunday is all about. Well, then what do you do? Do you bring people in on Saturday morning? Do you have them come back on Monday night and get their ashes? What do you end up doing? And they even thought about letting priests decide in their parishes what would be best. But Pope Paul VI, thankfully, I think said we're going to keep Ash Wednesday, and so that's still the beginning point of Lent.
Huh. And I will say from my own personal experience that I think the practice still has a pretty strong foothold,
Oh gosh, yeah,
at
yeah.
least in our country right now.
Yeah, I was reading recently a survey that they asked what percentage of Catholics observe a Lenten fast of some kind,
Hmm.
whatever it might be, do some kind of Lenten penance. And it's something like 80% of Catholics observe Lent in some way, which
Hmm.
is like double what and more what who come to Mass on Sundays.
Right?
But people are they're just captivated by this time of year, and the participation at Mass on Ash Wednesday is extremely high because people want to engage in this ritual of repentance as they begin the 6 weeks.
Yes, yes, I know. In fact, in my region, we often have to have even just services with liturgy of the word and distribution of ashes
Yeah,
because we have so many people. We even have people in our city that there's a downtown church and they have on their lunch break like a service with a distribution of ashes so that people can go on their lunch break, and it is packed.
yeah. Yeah, it's really inspiring. I did some work with the Hispanic community in Kansas City for a number of years, and very impressive the numbers that come together for masses on that day. They were literally outside the front door of the church. We just didn't have enough room
Hmm.
inside to pack everybody in. So it's a devotion that means a lot to many different segments of the Catholic population.
I agree. Now, before we wrap up, I have one final question for you. I thought it was fitting to end with this one as we are in the Easter season, especially transitioning from our conversation of Ash Wednesday. So, of course, Easter in our calendar moves, Easter Sunday, I should say, moves each year. So, why does Easter move each year versus being on one set date? And was there ever any dialogue about possibly making it a set date?
Yeah, there's always a lot of dialogue around it, but the date the date we follow, the formula we follow is that Easter Sunday is the Sunday following the first full moon of spring. So we first wait for spring to arrive. March 21st is generally how they compute it. Then we wait for the first full moon to arrive. And then the Sunday after that becomes Easter. Now, the difference is that among the Orthodox in the East, they add in another factor, and that is that the Passover must have been celebrated before we can observe Easter. Now, there that is what causes usually a difference of 1 week in the celebrations, but sometimes it's almost a month, and in some years it's the same day. So this year it did happen to be the same day, and it will occur again in a few years from now. I think almost any time it falls on the same day, this question comes up. Couldn't we come up with a formula everybody would agree to? There was some energy around this at the time of the Second Vatican Council, and I put this in my book as well. Many people who plan liturgy are familiar with the flagship document of the council, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy. If you look at the very end of it, there is a presentation, kind of a hope that a common date of Easter could be found. Pope Francis, may he rest in peace, spoke very favorably about the possibility of joining these and adjusting our calendar if we needed to align with an agreed upon date. I just think practically this would be a very difficult thing to achieve. If you think Ascension Thursday is hard in the United States, imagine trying to get a common date of Easter for every Christian on earth.
Right.
It's not just us and the Orthodox, it's also the Protestant churches, the
Yes.
evangelical churches. I mean, I just everybody would have to come to an agreement on this, and I think ecumenically it would be extremely hard to find an agreement. But maybe it could happen. Maybe the Holy Spirit would guide us in how this could be done, but we just don't have it.
Hmm.
So when I'll kind of make this reflection too about the way we celebrate the Easter Vigil with baptism, because I've pointed this out in some talks and in books and articles as well. When we say that Easter should be the time of year for adult baptisms, we're saying something very profound about the connection between the individual's experience of the Paschal Mystery and the Roman calendar's centering of the Paschal Mystery. That the whole calendar pivots around Easter, and your whole life as an individual Christian pivots around baptism. So by putting baptism at the Easter Vigil, this states something very profound to the individual, that they are dying and rising with Christ and kind of absorbing this entire Paschal mystery into their own lives. So and not every Christian denomination follows this belief. Others have computed it differently. They'll do a baptism of adults at any time of year, but we are saying in so many words, we'll baptize you not when you think you're ready, and not when our catechists think you're ready, but we're going to follow Sunday following the first full moon of spring. We'll baptize you when the earth is ready,
Hmm.
when the moon is ready,
Hmm.
when the sun is ready, when all of the cosmos has aligned in one way, so that you can experience the full impact of the resurrection and what this means in the life of the universe, but also in your life as a new Christian. So the calendar has this beauty to it that helps us organize our thoughts and experience in depth the great Paschal mystery that guides us throughout our days.
I can't think of another way to end in more eloquently than that. I that is a wonderful insight too, and I think it's a great one to remind pastoral musicians for, because of course we may, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization. I will just say for myself, I'm so focused on the minutia, if you will, the many movements, not the minutia, the many movements of Easter Vigil, of course, the many readings, the many musical preparations that must be made. I'll admit, I don't necessarily focus my thoughts or energies on the logic behind why the baptisms happen. I just focus on how to best support the motion as things go. But to sit and reflect on why the church in its wisdom chooses that is a really, really great way to end this conversation today.
Well, thanks again, Amanda. Appreciate all your good work and for taking an interest in my research. I think Sacred Times is a book I wanted to write because people can learn a lot about the Catholic life by learning more about our calendar. It's so foundational to everything that we do. It's a book you probably don't realize you need until you pick it up and start to page through it, and then some things come to light that you just hadn't thought of before.
I agree entirely. I will admit again that I had to stop at writing questions for this book for our conversation because the book is so jam-packed full of important information that we just couldn't fit it all in. I've always wanted to do this, like I'm on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, but I'm gonna put your book up really quickly. Sacred Times. My computer screen is blurring it a little bit, but Sacred Times is available from Liturgical Press. I strongly recommend that listeners pick up a copy and just have it on your bookshelf because it is excellent reading. So thank you for your work on this book, and thank you always for everything you do for the liturgy and the church, Father Paul.
Thank you, Amanda. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too.